Hello again, and thank you for being here tonight. Whether you're lying in bed with the lights low or half awake on a quiet train ride home, you've found your way to a story, and that's all you need to do now. Let the rest of the world slip away. Let your breathing slow. The story is about to begin. But first, I have two soft questions. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it for you right now? I always find it strangely comforting how these stories echo through strange hours. In attic bedrooms, hospital waiting rooms, dim airport lounges, or old summer cabins with the windows cracked open to the night. It starts, as these things often do, with a window. The house stood at the end of a road that never really ended, just faded into trees and fog. Pale blue shutters clung to its sides like old memories, and vines ran like veins up the brick. People said no one lived there now, but lights still flickered behind the upstairs window. Take a breath. Let the hush settle around you. They used to call her Clara, the woman who came back after the funeral. Not to grieve. She had done enough of that. She returned only to pack a box, to sell the keys, to let go. That's what she told herself. But the town was smaller than she remembered, and the cold settled into her coat like it had missed her. She parked the car just before dusk and walked up the path that cracked under each step. A single crow watched from the roofline. No sound but her own breath. Inside, the air was stale with forgotten heat. Dust clung to the wallpaper like it had grown from it. She didn't turn on the lights, just stood in the front room, looking up toward the window. There had always been something about that window. As a child, she used to stare up at it from the garden. Sometimes she thought she saw someone staring back, but that had been a dream, a trick of moonlight. Hadn't it? Now, years later, the window was still there. Closed, quiet, empty. She told herself it didn't matter. She was only here for the weekend. The realtor would handle the rest. And yet, as night settled in and the shadows grew long across the floorboards, Clara couldn't help but glance up again. The upstairs window. It was glowing, just faintly. A soft blue light, like a TV left on in an empty room. She didn't remember leaving anything plugged in. The electricity should have been off. But the light, it pulsed once, then dimmed. She waited. Maybe the wiring was bad, or maybe she was tired. She hadn't slept well in weeks. Still, she reached into her coat pocket for the ring of old keys. They jingled, dull metal, worn with time. The attic stair groaned somewhere above. And though she hadn't planned on staying the night, Clara turned toward the hallway anyway, because some part of her still remembered the girl by the window, and maybe, just maybe, the girl remembered her too. Clara didn't sleep that night. Not deeply, not truly. She drifted in and out of thought, eyes closed but mind open, waiting for something. The kind of sleep where your breath stays too shallow and dreams never quite arrive. Downstairs, the guest room she'd chosen still smelled faintly of old wood and lavender. Familiar, faint. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, curling in soft spirals like tired parchment. A small lamp glowed beside the bed, casting gentle shadows that moved when nothing else did. Her suitcase sat untouched by the door, half-zipped. She hadn't unpacked. Part of her hadn't meant to stay. Above her, the creaks began again. 1, 2, 3. Soft footfalls. She stared at the ceiling, not quite alarmed, not yet, but aware. She sat up slowly and listened. The old house was full of sounds. It always had been. The pipes tapped and breathed. The radiator clanked. The wind scratched faintly at the window frames. But this was footsteps, and they had paused. She rose and crossed to the door, pulling on her cardigan. Her bare feet were cold against the floorboards. The silence pressed against her ears, as if the house itself was holding its breath. In the kitchen, she boiled water and made tea. The same peppermint box from earlier, though now it felt more ritual than refreshment. She carried the mug to the window and stood in the dim light, looking out. The garden beyond was unchanged. Damp earth, crooked bird bath, a garden gate that no longer latched. Beyond that, only trees, black-limbed and reaching. She took a sip of tea, let it settle in her chest. And then that feeling returned, like eyes on her back, like being noticed by the night itself. She turned, slowly. Nothing behind her. Only the hallway. Only stillness. She stepped into the living room. The fire hadn't been lit in years, but the grate was clean, the logs dry. A memory stirred. Her mother kneeling here, brushing ash from her fingers, humming something soft. And then Clara noticed the book. It lay on the armchair, leather-bound, a little worn, one of her mother's poetry collections. She didn't remember unpacking it. She knelt beside the chair and opened the book. Pages yellowed with time. One had been dog-eared, deliberately folded. Clara smoothed it open. The poem read, "Where silence falls and shadows slip, the house remembers every step. It keeps the names we try to hide and calls them back at eventide." She read it aloud. Slowly. The words echoed, faintly. And then the sound came again. A soft creak. Not beneath her this time, but above. Her gaze lifted to the ceiling. The footsteps were back, pacing, deliberate. 1, then 2, then stillness again. She set the book down, moved to the staircase. The light above had burned out years ago. The top of the stairs melted into shadow. She placed one foot on the first step and it groaned, loudly. A warning or a welcome? She climbed, slowly. Halfway up she paused. The hallway was the same. Wallpaper faded to greenish gray, lined with family photos turned inward to avoid their gaze. The attic door was closed, but the door to her childhood bedroom, it was open, not wide, just a sliver, enough to see that the lamp on the desk was on. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't touched that room, not since she was 17. She stepped forward, heart steady but curious. The carpet muffled her steps. Her hand reached for the door, and with a slow push, she entered. The scent of lavender was stronger here. The curtains were drawn. The same faded quilt covered the bed. Her old books lined the shelf, untouched, spine by spine. And on the pillow sat a folded note, her name written on the front. Clara. She picked it up, hesitating. The handwriting was hers, but she hadn't written anything. Not yet. She unfolded the note. Inside, 3 words. "Do you remember?" She read them once, twice, and then, from behind her, another creak. Just one. She turned toward the hallway, note still in hand, as the light above flickered once, then went out. The room was silent, but something had shifted, and Clara wasn't sure she was alone. The lamp didn't flicker again. It simply died, as if the light had decided it was no longer needed or no longer welcome. Clara stood still in the dark. Her eyes adjusted slowly, shapes blooming from shadow. The walls of her childhood room hadn't changed. The wallpaper, pale blue with tiny stars, had faded to something like fog. The bookshelves still leaned slightly left, crammed with forgotten stories and dust. But the silence had changed. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't threatening. It was listening. She took a soft breath and stepped back toward the bed. The note was still in her hand, slightly crumpled now. "Do you remember?" The question lingered like smoke. She didn't. Not clearly. Just flickers, half-formed memories behind fogged glass. She sat on the edge of the bed. The springs gave a tired sigh beneath her weight. The room smelled the same, lavender and paper, a hint of cedar from the old drawer chest. It was too familiar to be haunted, and too strange to feel like home. On the nightstand sat a snow globe, the one she'd carried with her for years. Inside, a little cabin under white plastic snow. She reached for it and turned it over once. The snow drifted silently down, just like it had when she was 7, hiding under these same covers during thunderstorms. Downstairs, the pipes let out a long, tired groan. She blinked. Had she shut the bedroom door? She didn't think so. She crossed the room softly, bare feet brushing the floor. The hallway was still dark, the bulb above long since given up. But at the end of the corridor, toward the attic door, something was glowing. Not a light. Not really. More like the suggestion of light. A gentle haze, soft and golden, like memory made visible. She stepped into the hallway. Each floorboard beneath her gave a different sound. Small creaks, gentle whines. Her body remembered where to step and where not to. The quiet choreography of childhood. The glow was coming from the attic door. It pulsed faintly, like it was waiting. But when she reached for the knob, it was cold, ice cold. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she stepped backward, returned to the edge of her old room, and turned to face the mirror that had stood there since she was 12. It was tall, slightly warped, the kind that made your reflection ripple if you moved too quickly. In the mirror, she could see the room, the quilt, the door, and something else. Behind her, in the corner, a shadow that didn't belong to her. She turned quickly. Nothing. Just the chair in the corner, the one her grandmother used to sit in. But there was something resting on the cushion now. A photograph. She stepped closer. It was one of the old Polaroids, slightly curled at the edges. A snapshot of the back garden. Overgrown hedges. The swing that had long since collapsed. And at the center, her. or someone who looked exactly like her. The same dark hair, same mustard-colored coat. But this girl, this version, was standing in the exact same place Clara had stood last night, facing the window, looking up. Clara felt her mouth go dry. She turned the photo over. There was writing, a date, October 12th, 1997. Clara stared at it for a long moment. She had no memory of that day. But she was certain of one thing. That coat hadn't existed until last winter. It was new, bought at a thrift shop downtown. She knew, because the receipt was still in her wallet. A sound broke the silence. Not a creak, a whisper, low and distant, but clear. Clara. She froze. The whisper had come from the attic. She backed away slowly, photo still in hand, and the mirror caught her movement again. But this time, the reflection lingered, like it was waiting for her to look back. She didn't. Not yet. Instead, she moved to the desk and opened the top drawer. Old notebooks, worn pens, ticket stubs from school trips, and a key, tiny, brass, familiar. She held it in her palm and let it warm in her skin. The key to the attic door. She hadn't seen it in years. She stepped to the hallway again. The glow had faded. The door no longer hummed with quiet energy. It looked ordinary again. Still closed. Still waiting. She tucked the key into her pocket and turned back toward her room. Back toward the bed. The folded note. The fading snow globe. The shadow was gone. But the feeling wasn't. The house was remembering her, and slowly, quietly, she was remembering it too. Morning never quite arrived at the old house. The sky turned a softer gray, the mist pulled back a little from the windows. But the light never reached far. It filtered in like breath beneath a closed door. Quiet, reluctant, and tired from traveling. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, still in last night's clothes. The attic key lay beside her on the blanket, catching what little light there was. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just drifted in and out of memory, unsure which dreams belonged to her and which were borrowed from the house. Downstairs, the clock in the front hall let out a single, heavy chime. It was 8, but the house didn't move. No sounds of kettles or footsteps. No humming from the radio in the kitchen. Just that same hush. Not empty, but paused, as if something was listening. She held the photograph again. The version of herself staring up at the window, wearing the same mustard coat, standing in a yard that should have been forgotten. The date still made no sense. She'd been 5. But this photo, this Clara looked older, and now a new detail had appeared. The edge of a figure, blurred behind the hedge, watching her. She blinked. Had it always been there? She stood, wrapped her coat around her, and crossed the room. At the door, she paused. The hallway was awake. Not loud, never loud, but expectant, as if it had felt her decision. The attic door at the far end remained shut. No glow now, just wood and brass and shadow. She moved slowly, each step cushioned by old carpet. Halfway down the hall, she paused to glance at the painting on the wall. The old one of her grandparents' wedding day. The frame was crooked. Had it been crooked yesterday? She reached out to straighten it and noticed something tucked behind the corner, a slip of paper. She pulled it free. A torn piece of a letter. The edges singed, the ink smeared with time. Only one line remained clear. The girl at the window is not who you remember. She stared at the words until they no longer made sense, then folded the paper and placed it in her pocket beside the key. The attic door stood in front of her now, still closed. She touched the knob, still cold. The key slid in smoothly. No resistance, no sound. With a breath, she turned it. The lock gave a soft click. She opened the door. Darkness. Heavy. Waiting. The smell of dust and forgotten cloth spilled out. Attic air, still and dry and preserved. She stepped inside. The staircase creaked beneath her weight, each step softer than expected. The attic wasn't large, just a single sloped room beneath the roof, with a round window at the far end. The glass was fogged from the inside. Light filtered through cracks in the roofline, casting thin silver lines across boxes and old furniture draped in cloth. Something moved, a whisper of fabric. Clara froze. But it was only the curtain, shifting slightly as if it had been touched by memory. She walked slowly past a stack of old books, one of which bore her name in looping child's handwriting. Clara's journal, age 8. She didn't remember writing it. Beside it sat a doll, arms missing, dress yellowed. One glass eye still watched. She crouched to lift the cloth off a nearby trunk, revealing a box of tapes, cassette recordings, labeled in careful script. She picked one up. October 12th. Window. The same date as the photograph. A small player sat nearby. She inserted the tape and pressed play. For a moment, nothing. Then, static. Soft at first, then sharper. Then a sound beneath the static. A whisper. Clara. She pulled back instinctively. The tape continued. She still watching. Clara stopped the player. The attic felt colder. She turned to the round window and wiped away the condensation. The backyard stretched out below. Empty, except someone stood by the hedge, same mustard coat, looking up. Clara backed away from the window. When she looked again, no one was there. She turned toward the stairwell, and that's when she saw it. A mirror, propped against the far wall, behind an old trunk. She didn't remember it being there. In the reflection, her, the window behind her, and something else. A shadow just past her shoulder, tall and silent. She spun around. Nothing. Just the attic. Dust. Stillness. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her breath. She gathered the tape, the journal, the torn letter, and she left the attic. Quietly, as if trying not to wake something. She locked the door behind her. The key burned slightly in her palm. Back in her room, she sat again on the bed. The house hadn't changed, but something inside it had remembered her. And it was waiting for her to remember it back. Clara didn't sleep that night either. She lay curled beneath the blanket, the attic key on the nightstand beside her, the cassette tape still tucked into her coat pocket. The whisper still echoed in her ears. She's still watching. It hadn't sounded like a threat, more like a reminder. Rain began again sometime past midnight, soft and even, tapping lightly on the windows like a lullaby with no melody. Outside, the street lamp flickered. She turned on her side, facing the far wall. There, in the glass of the wardrobe mirror, she saw her own reflection. Still, but something about it felt wrong. The light didn't fall the same way. Her reflection's hands were folded differently than hers. She sat up slowly and looked directly at it. For a moment, it matched her perfectly. Then, a blink, out of sync. Clara froze. The reflection tilted its head, just slightly, as if curious. She reached for the lamp and flicked it on. In that same moment, the reflection returned to normal, perfectly aligned, nothing out of place. She stared for a long time, not breathing. Eventually, she got up, crossed the room, and turned the mirror to face the wall. The image of her own eyes, not quite hers, stayed behind in her mind. Downstairs, the clock chimed once. 2:30. She walked barefoot through the hallway. The wallpaper was slightly peeled in places, the floor cool beneath her. She passed the crooked painting again, now slightly more askew than before. In the kitchen, she put on the kettle. The room smelled of old bread and rainwater. She pulled open a drawer, looking for a notepad, and instead found a stack of letters bundled with string. Each one addressed to her, but the handwriting wasn't familiar. She opened the first one slowly. Clara, if you're reading this, then the attic door has been unlocked again. I tried to seal it after what happened, but things don't stay gone here. Not really. I hope you remember enough to stay safe. Don't listen to the girl in the window. She isn't you. There was no signature. She opened another. I saw you today, standing in the rain with your hands in your pockets like always. But your eyes weren't right. I think I'm losing the real you. Please come back before she takes your place entirely. Clara read each line slowly, her heart steady but cold. They were written like memories, not warnings. But whose memories? She gathered the letters and placed them on the counter, then poured the tea and stared out the kitchen window. The backyard was dark. The hedge moved slightly in the breeze, but nothing else. She let the tea cool before taking a sip. The warmth helped. Only a little. Upstairs, something creaked. She stood. Not the attic. She'd locked that. No, it came from her own room. She walked carefully through the hall, each step softened by the carpet's worn pattern. The door was still open, the mirror still turned. But now it reflected a sliver of the hallway, and someone was standing in it. She couldn't see the face, just the shape. Clara stepped into the room. The figure didn't move. She took one breath, two, then stepped in front of the mirror and saw only herself, alone. But something had changed. Her reflection was smiling, only slightly, just enough to see it. Clara touched her own lips. She wasn't smiling. She backed away and closed the wardrobe completely, then turned to the small journal she'd found in the attic the night before. She hadn't opened it yet. The cover was soft, worn by age. Inside, the pages were full, but only the first few entries were in her handwriting. The rest, it was her name, over and over. Different versions. Block letters. Slanted. Scribbled. Sometimes with eyes drawn inside the A. Sometimes with the date. October 12th, repeated like a mantra. Then a phrase, circled in black ink. Watch the window at 3:13. She checked the time. 3:09. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The night looked the same. Empty street, silent hedge, raindrops slipping down glass. She waited. The digital clock on the nightstand ticked forward. 3:10. She blinked and saw a flicker of movement in the far window across the street. An attic light, on for just a second, then gone. She kept watching. 3:11. She saw a figure move behind the hedge. A girl, mustard coat, looking up. Not at the house, but straight at her. 3:12. Clara pressed her hand to the window pane. The glass was ice cold. The girl didn't move. 3:13. The light in Clara's own attic flicked on. She hadn't touched the switch. And behind the glass, in the attic, a second figure stood still. Watching her, the attic light stayed on all night. Clara didn't sleep. Not really. She drifted in and out, curled beneath her blanket, her eyes half closed but always drawn upward. Even with the door shut, the light bled through the edges. Soft, golden, constant. Like it was waiting. Like someone was still up there. She stayed in bed until morning light dulled the room into quiet gray. Downstairs, the kettle whistled as she sat at the kitchen table, a candle flickering beside the stack of letters. The one with the phrase circled, "Watch the window at 3:13, was still on top. She traced it with her fingertip as if the ink could speak back. And for a moment, she remembered something. Not clearly, just a feeling of standing behind someone taller, someone holding her hand, looking out this same window. Rain on the glass, the glow of an attic window across the street. A whisper, "That's not our light." She shook it off. The attic key was still in her pocket. Heavy, cold. She stood up, crossed the hall, and stared at the ceiling door. It was shut, silent. She climbed the hallway stool, reached up with a breath, and pushed it open. The ladder creaked as she pulled it down. The air above smelled the same. Cedar and dust and something faintly sweet like dried flowers. She climbed slowly. Each step settled with a low wooden groan. The attic looked unchanged, but the light was still on. She stepped inside. The space was the same as before. The same boxes, same cloth-covered furniture. But something new sat in the center of the room. A mirror, tall, oval, and freestanding. It hadn't been there before. Clara approached it slowly, each step muffled by the attic rug. The mirror showed her full reflection, pale skin, curled hair. slight shadows under her eyes, but this time the image moved with her exactly. No delay, no flicker, no smile. Still, she didn't trust it. Behind the mirror sat something else, a wooden chair, aged and splintered. She knelt down beside it and ran her hand over the cushion. It was indented, like someone had just stood up. She stood again and turned to leave, but her foot bumped something beneath the rug. She crouched, pulled the fabric back. There, half hidden beneath the edge, was a floorboard slightly out of place. She pried it up. Inside, another tape. No label. She slipped it into her coat pocket. The moment she did, the attic light flickered. Once, then twice, then out. She held her breath. The attic was darker now, not pitch black, but thick with shadow and silence. She backed toward the ladder, 1 foot at a time. Something creaked behind her. She didn't turn, just climbed down, closed the door, and left the light off. Downstairs, she placed the new cassette on the kitchen table beside the old one. They looked nearly identical. Same size, same black plastic, same faint scratches. She didn't play it. Not yet. Instead, she walked into the front room and opened the curtains. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was soft with morning light, low clouds stretching over the rooftops. A few leaves skittered down the sidewalk. She stared across the street. To the window she'd seen the girl beneath. It was empty now. No light, no figure, just stillness. She turned back toward the room and froze. The mirror was there, against the wall, the same mirror from the attic. Tall, oval, and freestanding. It hadn't been in this room before. She walked toward it slowly. Her reflection stared back. Same clothes, same hair, but something behind her, in the mirror, moved. She turned quickly. Nothing. Turned back. Stillness. But now her reflection's expression had changed, eyes slightly wider, lips parted as if to say something. Clara stepped back and left the room. She needed air. Outside, the street smelled of wet stone and old pine. A breeze moved through the hedge. She walked toward the far corner, the place where the girl had stood. Each step felt like memory. She stood exactly where the figure had been, looked up at her own attic window. No light. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye in the hedge. A scrap of yellow fabric. She reached in and pulled it free. A piece of coat, mustard yellow, frayed along the edge. She looked around, but the street was empty. The village felt paused, like everyone else had vanished into the fog. She walked slowly back toward the house. When she reached the porch, she noticed a fresh mark on the front door. A single handprint, pressed into the misted glass, and it was facing inward, as if someone had been standing inside, reaching out. Clara didn't play the new tape right away. Instead, she walked through the house slowly, her fingers brushing along the walls, tracing the grain of the wood. Every room held stillness, but it wasn't peaceful. Not anymore. It felt like something had shifted, like the house had drawn a breath and was waiting to exhale. She brewed tea, lit a candle, and waited until the wind settled. Then she picked up the cassette. The recorder's plastic felt colder than before. Click. Soft static bloomed in the silence. For a long moment, that was all. The hush and hiss of magnetic dust spinning on ribbon. Then a voice. Not hers. Not anyone she recognized. It was male, young, maybe. Quiet, but clear. If you're hearing this, then I'm not there anymore. She leaned in. It's in the mirror. It doesn't always move. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it mimics. But never trust it. The tape hissed again, louder now. Then another line. I saw her too, the girl by the window. She's not what she looks like. Click. It ended there. Clara rewound the tape and listened again, but the message never changed. Always the same 3 lines, always ending with the same warning. She let it sit beside the first cassette. Together, they felt heavier than they should. She stepped outside. The village had changed. It wasn't in the houses or the roads. It was something harder to name. A feeling, like the fog was thicker, the silence more intentional. As she walked, the windows stayed dark. Even the bakery was shuttered. She turned toward the bookstore, the one with the old red awning. Its door was open. Inside, dust caught the morning light like tiny feathers. The bell above the door didn't ring. No one stood behind the counter, but the record player spun gently in the corner. No music, just a slow rotation, as if it had never stopped from the day before. Clara stepped around the display table, drawn toward the back of the shop where the antique section had been. There was a mirror leaning against the bookshelf. Not oval this time. Rectangular, framed in dark wood. Still, it felt familiar. She stared into it. Her reflection blinked, then paused. Too long. She stepped back. That's when she noticed the book. It was lying open on the floor. She knelt. The page was aged, yellowed at the edges. Some kind of record. Dated 1976. A list of names. Residents. She scanned them slowly. Halfway down, her breath caught. Clara Morley. 12 Rowan Street. Her address, her name, but written in ink nearly 50 years old. She read it again, slower this time. Then turned the page. On the next list, her name was gone. In its place, E. Morley. Another page. No mention of either. Each year, the list shifted. Names vanished, others repeated. And always one name circled, a Winters. She stood, heart fluttering. The mirror beside her flickered, only for a breath. But it was enough. She left the shop without the book. Back at home, Clara stood before the fireplace. She'd never noticed it before, but behind the mantel was a narrow shelf. Dusty, hidden. A small folded letter sat there. No stamp, no address, just her name. Inside was a short message. Not everything that leaves stays gone. The handwriting was hers. She didn't remember writing it, didn't even recognize the paper. Her fingertips brushed the edge. It felt older than anything else in the house. Fragile. She slipped it into her coat pocket with the tapes, then looked up and froze. The mirror was back. Standing in the hallway now. This time it was turned toward the wall, as if it was facing away. She moved closer. In the reflection, her back was visible, but behind it, so was the hallway, and someone standing at the far end, not moving, not blinking, just watching. She turned. No one was there. Turned back. The figure was gone. But a single word was written in fog across the mirror's surface. Remember. That night, Clara stayed in the downstairs bedroom. She didn't trust the attic. She barely trusted the light. She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes flicking from the mirror in the corner, to the window, to the shadows along the wall, the tapes, the names, the letters. They weren't pieces of a puzzle. They were warnings, left by people who'd seen something they couldn't explain. People like her. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to quiet her breath. And that's when she heard it. A knock. 3 soft raps. Not at the front door, not on the window, but from inside the house, from the attic above. She didn't move at first. The knock had been too soft, too intentional. The kind of sound you couldn't mistake for creaking wood or shifting wind. It came again, 3 quiet raps, then silence. Clara stared at the ceiling, as if the boards above her might breathe or bend or whisper. Then she stood. Each step toward the hallway felt longer than it should. The house stretched in strange ways at night. Shadows doubled themselves. Light seemed to get lost mid-air. She passed the mirror. It didn't reflect her. It reflected the staircase behind her. Empty, but off by a second. As if the house was remembering what she'd done yesterday, not what she was doing now. She didn't look again. The attic door loomed at the top of the stairs. It hadn't been open earlier, but now it was cracked just enough to let the dark spill through. Clara climbed. Each stair groaned like a sigh held too long. When she reached the top, she paused. Listened. Nothing. She pushed the door open slowly, hand trembling just slightly at the knob. The attic smelled of cedar and paper, cold dust, forgotten things. A candle burned in the corner. Not hers. It flickered beside a trunk she didn't recognize. Old, curved, leather-strapped. She stepped closer, careful not to disturb anything. The trunk was unlocked. Inside, notebooks, stacked neatly. Some leather-bound, others frayed at the spine. On top was a photograph, a girl standing in the window. Not Clara, but close enough to stir something in her memory. She turned the photo over, in faded ink. A. Winters, 1974. She exhaled, slow. A name that kept repeating. A girl who looked like her, a window just like hers. She picked up the first notebook and opened it gently. The handwriting was careful, slanted, pressed into the page. I see her. Not always, but often when the wind changes. She stands in the reflection, just outside reach. Another line below it. She mimics, but not perfectly. like an echo that comes back wrong. Clara closed the book. The air in the attic felt heavier now. Still, almost expectant. She turned to leave, but the candle blew out on its own. No breeze, no movement, just gone. Downstairs, Clara made tea with shaking hands. The mirror in the hallway had changed positions. It now reflected the attic door. She turned it slowly until it faced the wall again. That night, she didn't sleep in any of the bedrooms. She curled up on the sofa instead, wrapped in her grandmother's knitted shawl, and watched the candlelight flicker across the walls. At some point, she drifted. In that in-between space, not fully asleep, not fully awake, she heard footsteps. Not heavy, not threatening, just pacing back and forth upstairs. She didn't get up, didn't breathe too loud, just listened until silence returned. In the morning, the fog outside was thicker than ever. The world beyond her window had vanished, only outlines of rooftops, tree limbs like reaching fingers. She stepped onto the porch, clutching the second notebook from the trunk. A voice called from across the street. "Clara." She turned. No one there, just fog. The voice came again. Closer this time. "Clara, don't go back inside." Her breath caught. The voice was familiar, painfully so. It sounded like her sister, except her sister had passed away 3 winters ago. She stepped back, heart racing. The fog closed in tighter, swallowing the shape of the house across the street, then the lamp post, then even the path beneath her feet. And from somewhere within that white silence, the voice whispered again, this time from behind her. "Watch the mirror." She turned, but no one was there. Inside, the mirror had fogged over, even though there was no change in the house's temperature. Across its surface, words appeared, as if breathed from the inside. She's closer now. Clara backed away, but the tape recorder clicked on. She hadn't touched it. A new voice, warped, static heavy, played through. If you leave, she follows. If you stay, she watches. Choose carefully. The tape stopped. The mirror cleared. And for just a moment, she saw herself standing there. But her reflection smiled. Clara hadn't. The storm had returned overnight. Not a loud one, not thunder or lightning, but a steady whisper of rain tapping against every window in the house. A hush, as if the sky was trying to say something too quietly for human ears. Clara sat at the small table near the kitchen window, the notebook open beside a cup of tea gone cold. She hadn't written anything. She just turned the pages, slowly, reading someone else's thoughts. The girl in the reflection doesn't blink. Sometimes she mouths my words, but not always at the same time. The entries blurred together, a mix of observation, fear, resignation. Whoever had written them had stopped dating the pages eventually. Time had folded in on itself. Clara closed the book. She wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked toward the hallway. The mirror was still turned to the wall, but somehow it still watched. She decided to explore the second floor again. There was one room she hadn't gone into, the one at the end of the hall, past the linen closet. Its door had been stuck since the first day. Today, it opened. Inside was a narrow room with slanted ceilings and a single window shaped like an arch. The light through the glass was wrong. Too white. Too still. The kind of light you'd find in a painting, not a room. Clara stepped inside. The walls were lined with mirrors, not all matching. Some antique, some cracked, some no larger than a hand. They leaned at odd angles, overlapping one another like fallen leaves. She turned slowly, catching glimpses of herself, dozens of her, scattered across glass. Some moved with her, some didn't. She walked past one small oval mirror and froze. Her reflection was missing. In its place, the girl. The one from the photograph. Same dark eyes, same braid, same tilt of the head. But she wasn't mimicking Clara. She was waiting. Behind her, in that false mirrored space, stood the attic door. Closed. Then it opened. Only in the reflection. Clara turned sharply. The room behind her was still, silent. When she looked back into the glass, the girl was gone. But the attic door in the reflection remained open. She backed out of the room, closing the door with a soft click. The rain had thickened into fog again, this time creeping along the edges of the windows as if trying to peer in. Clara moved downstairs, mind racing. The notebook now felt heavier in her hands. She set it on the desk, opened to the next page. This one was different. A sketch. Not expertly done, but careful. Someone had tried to capture a face. Not Clara's, but almost. Below the sketch, she doesn't want out. She wants in. The air changed. A soft creak, the sound of pressure against floorboards. She turned. The hallway behind her was empty, but the mirror had moved again. Not on its own, not quite. Just slightly turned, just enough to catch the corner of the room she was standing in. She reached out and turned it all the way to face the wall again. But this time, the glass showed something behind her. Not a wall, a window, and in it, the girl. Just watching. Clara spun, heart rising into her throat. The room was empty, but the window was open. She hadn't touched it. Outside, the fog curled along the grass like smoke. The trees beyond the fence swayed, though there was no wind. Clara stepped back, closed the window, latched it twice. She turned to the mirror. The girl was gone. Her own reflection had returned. But her eyes weren't looking at herself. They were looking just past her shoulder. She didn't check, didn't turn, just whispered, "Not now." And the mirror fogged over. Later, as dusk began to gather, Clara sat on the living room floor with every notebook spread out before her. The entries, the sketches, the warnings. They all pointed to the same truth. This wasn't a haunting. It was an invitation. Each reflection, each echo, was a door. And someone, or something, wanted her to step through. She glanced toward the mirror one last time. Its surface clear, her reflection calm. But behind her, in the faint edge of the frame, a shape moved, too soft to be seen clearly, too steady to be ignored. The night came early. Too early. Clouds had thickened by mid-afternoon, casting the house in dim blue-gray light that made the corners feel deeper, the mirrors darker. Clara lit a few candles, not for warmth, but for something quieter, like protection or memory. She sat on the staircase with her legs tucked close, the notebooks spread across the landing. She'd begun to map them now, not just by entry, but by pattern. Words and phrases that repeated like ritual. She waits in the glass. Don't speak to her first, the attic knows. Some entries were crossed out, others smeared, as though the writer had second-guessed even their own warnings. The silence in the house had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt suspended, as if something had inhaled and was waiting to exhale. Clara tried the attic door again. Still locked, still cold. She placed her palm flat against the wood and closed her eyes. No sound, no breath, just the faint pulse of her heartbeat echoing up her arm. She leaned in, almost whispering, "Why me?" But the door said nothing. And yet, it heard her. She could feel it. A soft awareness, not human, not cruel, just patient. Back in the hallway, she noticed something new. A narrow draft near the floorboard. A breeze where there should be none. She knelt and pressed her fingers to the seam between two planks. Air. Faint, but there. She tapped once. Silence. Then, a single, gentle knock in return. Not echo, not coincidence. Clara stood slowly. She walked the hall again, touching walls, listening. The wind outside had stopped. The mirrors were quiet. But the house was listening too. Downstairs, one of the candles had gone out. Not flickered, extinguished. She relit it and returned to the desk. The last notebook, the smallest, had a section marked in ribbon. She hadn't opened that part yet. Inside were short lines, poetry almost, fragments of dreams or memory. She walks without sound in places that forget her. A window is a promise, a mirror, a door. Say her name, and she'll learn yours in return. Clara touched the page. The ink felt old, but not dry, as if the writer had only just finished. A faint sound stirred upstairs. Not footsteps, a dragging sound, slow, software, coming from the room with the mirrors. Clara climbed the stairs with a slow breath. The door to the mirror room was ajar. Candles flickered behind the glass, though she hadn't lit any. She stepped inside. One mirror, the largest, had fallen from the wall and cracked, but the crack wasn't random. It traced the shape of a doorway. She stepped closer, heart quiet but steady. In the mirror, her reflection stood still. But the girl's reflection walked forward, her expression unreadable, her hands at her sides. She stopped at the edge of the mirror's frame, then raised one finger and tapped. Once. Clara didn't move. She just whispered, "What do you want?" The girl tilted her head, then mouthed something soundless, a name. Clara couldn't hear it, but she felt it, in her chest, in her bones, like a secret she used to know. When she blinked, the girl was gone. Only her own reflection remained, but the air in the room had shifted. The draft was gone. The mirrors no longer echoed. Clara reached out and touched the glass. This time, it felt warm. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Instead, she sat again by the window. Not the one the girl appeared in, but a small side window near the staircase. From here, the town looked quiet. Still. But there was something about the lights. A rhythm in which windows were lit and unlit, as though the whole neighborhood was breathing. She imagined others, like her, sitting near candlelight, reading things they shouldn't, waiting for someone to knock back. Before bed, Clara wrote a single line in a new notebook. The mirrors only lie when you ask them to. She closed the book, and for the first time since arriving at the house, she slept with the door open. It was raining again, not heavily, just a fine, steady mist that turned the windows to soft watercolor and blurred the world outside into a hush of gray trees and distant roofs. Clara stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea, watching the drops run down the glass in slow, uncertain trails. She hadn't told anyone about the mirror. She hadn't told them that the girl was still watching, that the name, whatever it was, still hovered somewhere just behind her thoughts. Too soft to say, too real to forget. The mail came late that morning. One envelope, no stamp, just her name, written in the same narrow script as the notebooks she'd found upstairs. Inside was a single photograph. Sepia, faded, the girl by the window, standing at the top of the stairs. Same expression, same posture, as if Clara had taken it herself the night before. But the date written on the back read, January 3rd, 1912. She turned it over again, fingers trembling slightly. The wallpaper was the same. The lighting, the cracked stair rail, it wasn't a trick of resemblance. It was this house. She brought the photo upstairs and slipped it into the back of the smallest notebook. As she did, a folded page fell loose from between the bindings. On it, a list. Don't speak to her name. Don't offer her glass. Don't open the window after dusk. Don't stay if the mirrors hum. Clara stared at it, reading each line twice. The window. She walked to the hallway where it had all begun. The window with the lace curtains, the one no one else ever seemed to look at. It was shut tight, but the air around it was warmer now, thicker. That afternoon, she ventured into town. A walk, she told herself. Just some air. But her feet carried her to the edge of the old library, a crumbling stone building that looked like it had been abandoned and reopened a dozen times over the last century. Inside, the scent of aged paper and damp carpet filled her lungs. She asked for house records. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman in a dark cardigan, returned with a stack of bound ledgers and old census books. Clara found it on page 112. Branford House, built 1893, purchased in 1901 by the Merrow family. There was a name scribbled in the margin beside it. Adelaide Merrow. She didn't know how she recognized it, but she did. It rang in her bones the same way the mirror had. The librarian leaned over quietly. People say she disappeared in that house, vanished without a trace. Clara nodded. but in her heart she whispered. Number she never left. Back home, she lit a candle in the mirror room. The reflections remained still, but something inside the glass shimmered, as if fog were moving behind it. She set the photograph on the desk. Adelaide, the girl by the window, the one who still watched. The house felt quieter that evening. Not calm, just listening. Clara sat at the desk with the smallest notebook open. She wrote the name once, then folded the page closed and left it there. That night, she didn't dream, or if she did, the dream was waiting, still and silent like the house. When she woke, the candle had burned down to nothing, and the photograph was gone. Only the notebook remained, its cover gently askew, as if someone had closed it just before dawn. The mornings were darker now. Even when the sky was clear, there was something dim about the light that filtered into the house, as if the walls remembered dusk more fondly than day. Clara moved more slowly through the rooms, not out of fear, but to listen. She had begun to understand that the house didn't speak in sounds. It spoke in stillness, where the silence deepened, where the chill hovered longer than it should, where the dust never settled. That's where the stories lived. In the parlor, she found the book again, the one she didn't remember pulling from the shelf. Bound in soft green velvet, its spine stitched by hand, and its pages filled with the same handwriting as the notebooks. But the words inside weren't stories. Not really. They were more like observations, soft, disconnected fragments. She listens best when it rains. Do not light the candle when the clock is wrong. If you see her blink, close your eyes too. Some pages were torn out. Others had faint stains at the edges. Wax, maybe, or old ink washed by water. That afternoon, Clara brought the candle from the upstairs mirror room into the parlor. It was white, plain, heavy with dust at the base. She lit it and waited. The flame bent once, as if nudged by a breath, then stood still. For a moment, the room seemed ordinary, but the shadow it cast on the wall behind her chair was not her own. It was taller, thinner, and it moved when she didn't. She didn't panic. Not then. Instead, she slowly turned her head. Not toward the shadow, but toward the glass cabinet across the room. Its reflection held both figures, Clara in her chair, and the other shape behind her. Still, watching. When she stood, the shadow dissolved. No rush, no sound, just gone. And the candle flickered once, then returned to stillness. Outside, the rain had started again, thin and misting, brushing the windows like fingertips. Clara didn't bother with a coat. She stepped onto the porch with only the velvet book in her arms. There was something about the chill that helped her think. At the end of the street, she saw a boy, maybe 12 or 13, walking his bike beside him. He paused in front of the house, looked up at the attic window, then turned and left without waving. No one else noticed him, but Clara did. He had the look of someone who knew things he couldn't say. Back inside, she opened the green book to the last page. A new line had been written there. It hadn't been there this morning. When the candle casts her shadow, the name is almost ready. Clara read it aloud once, and the candle, still lit on the parlor table, flickered, but there was no breeze. She let it burn until midnight. The shadow didn't return, but just before she blew the candle out, she noticed something. On the wall behind her chair, where the shadow had once stretched, there was now a faint handprint. Just one, pale, child-sized, pressed into the wallpaper as if from the inside out. She didn't touch it. Not yet. She left the candle stub on the table and went upstairs without turning on the lights. The mirror room waited for her in its usual silence, but tonight the mirror was fogged. Even though the air was dry, she stood in front of it, not to look for Adelaide, but to say something out loud. Something she wasn't sure was hers. I see you. I remember you now. The mirror didn't change, but behind the glass, something listened. The garden hadn't been tended in years. Vines curled up the wrought iron fence, their leaves damp with last night's rain. The stone path was uneven, soft with moss, quiet with memory. Clara stepped outside before dawn, drawn by something she couldn't name. The house behind her was still asleep, or pretending to be. She clutched the green velvet book to her chest and followed the sound. It wasn't music, not exactly, just a hum, soft and low, like someone remembering a lullaby they hadn't sung in a very long time. She moved past the dead hydrangeas, their blossoms dried into paper. The overgrown hedge opened into a circle of grass, and there, in the middle, stood a single wooden swing, swaying gently though no wind stirred. And beneath the swing, a girl, small, still, her back to Clara. The girl's dress was old-fashioned, blue and buttoned at the back. Her hair, long and dark, was wet at the ends as if she'd been standing in the mist for hours. Clara didn't speak. She only waited. The hum faded, and the girl turned her head, just slightly. Not enough to see her face, only enough to know she'd been seen. Then she was gone. Not vanished, just no longer there. The swing stilled. Clara didn't feel fear, only cold, and something else. A pull, quiet but certain, like a string tied around her wrist. She returned to the house, went to the attic, and opened the notebook again. This time, a new entry had appeared. The garden is where she waits when the house is too loud. Later that morning, she explored the west wing, a part of the house she hadn't entered since arriving. It was darker than the rest, the windows covered with yellowed lace, the walls painted a green that had faded to gray. She found a sewing room. Dust lay like ash across the surface of an unfinished quilt. Pins still stuck into the shape of a name, but most of the letters were missing. On the wall hung a child's drawing, crayon scribbles of a house, a girl in a blue dress, and a window. Clara leaned closer. In the corner of the drawing, almost hidden in the lines, was another face, smaller, smiling, watching from inside the house. She took the picture down and carried it to the mirror room. The fog on the glass was gone now, replaced by her own reflection and something just behind it. Faint outlines, shapes that didn't belong to the wallpaper. Clara pressed the drawing to the mirror. It didn't reflect. The image vanished from the glass, but remained in her hand. She stepped back and whispered, "Who are you?" A single breath fogged the mirror from the inside. Just enough to write 4 letters. A D-E-L, the last one, never formed. That night, she left the window in her bedroom open. Wind moved softly through the curtains, and somewhere in the garden below, she heard the swing again, creaking back and forth. The lullaby had returned, but now it had words, faint, carried on the wind. Sleep now, before the clock forgets your name. Clara didn't sleep. She watched the window until dawn, and when the light came, she saw it. Just once. The girl, standing in the mist beneath the tree, holding the end of a broken string, watching and waiting. There was a door Clara hadn't noticed before. It was narrow, painted the same faded ivory as the hallway walls, almost invisible unless the light hit just right. That morning, it did. And the brass handle was warm. She pressed her hand against it. The door opened with no resistance, swinging inward into darkness thick as velvet. She lit one of the taper candles from the dining room and stepped inside. The room didn't smell like the others. It wasn't musty or cold. It smelled faintly of lavender and ink. The candlelight caught the edge of a small writing desk. A journal rested atop it. Open, its pages filled with spidery script that danced and tilted as if written in haste or fear. Clara leaned in. Each line was a single sentence, repeated again and again. The girl knows more than she should. She watches from the corners. She remembers when no one else does. Beneath the final line, a name had been scratched out. Ripped through with such pressure, the page had torn. Clara turned the page carefully. The next one was blank, except for a single fingerprint, too small to be an adult's, and stained with soot. She explored the room slowly. Dust drifted through the candlelight, catching the golden edges of a forgotten tea set, a broken typewriter, and a child's chair missing one leg. On the far wall, a large mirror hung sideways, like it had been torn down and hastily nailed back up. The glass inside wasn't reflective. Not fully. Instead, it shimmered slightly as though underwater. Clara stepped in front of it. No reflection came. Just her candle, floating alone in the dark. Then, for a second, the shimmer shifted, and in its place she saw a hallway. Not the one behind her, but one from a memory not her own. The wallpaper was striped in navy and cream, and at the far end stood a girl in a blue dress, holding a candle of her own. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She only mouthed 3 silent words. "Not your name." Then the shimmer returned. The mirror went still, and her reflection snapped back into place. Clara left the forgotten room, heart low in her chest. She needed air, but every window she passed showed the same thing. Fog. It had rolled in sometime during the morning. thick and silver and clinging to the glass like breath. She went to the attic, lit 2 more candles, and opened the velvet notebook. A new page had appeared. She found the place where they hid me, but the house has many tricks left. There were sketches beneath the writing, crude but detailed. A door, a hand, a key without teeth, and a girl drawn only in shadow. She didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. The phone in the study had stopped working the day before. Now it only buzzed when she lifted the receiver, like it was breathing instead of ringing. She tried anyway, dialed her old number, her mother's, even the bookstore in town, but all she heard was static. Then the faintest hum, the lullaby again. Clara put the phone down and waited for the house to exhale. That night, the mirror in her bedroom fogged over. She hadn't breathed near it, hadn't touched it, but there, drawn carefully into the condensation, was a shape. The swing, and a girl beneath it, drawn with a finger from the inside. Clara wiped the mirror clean with her sleeve, but her sleeve came away damp with soot. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, book in her lap, candle burning low, listening, watching, and wondering if the girl knew she was being watched too. The attic floor whispered under Clara's steps. It had started doing that, whispering, not creaking, not groaning like old wood should, but whispering, as though her movement stirred something just beneath the boards. This time, she followed it. Past the velvet chair, past the trunk of forgotten clothes, past the mirror draped in lace. The sound deepened where the shadows gathered near the north wall, the part of the attic that sloped sharply down to meet the floor. And there, behind a stack of yellowed books, was another door, barely a cupboard. No knob, no hinges, just a thin outline in the wood, and a keyhole shaped like a tear. She pressed her ear to it. Silence. Then, the faint sound of chalk. Clara stepped back. She fetched the small brass key from her journal, the one she had found wedged behind a floorboard in Chapter 9. It didn't fit perfectly, but when she turned it gently, the door gave way. Inside was no cupboard. It was a crawl space, no taller than her shoulders, carpeted in ash. And on the far wall, something was written. Dozens of phrases, scratched over and over with a trembling hand. Not my house. She watches through mirrors. The swing never stops. I didn't tell. I didn't tell. I didn't tell. Clara crawled closer, candle in hand. Each line was written in the same faint gray, not pencil. Dust. It hadn't been drawn on. It had been removed from the walls with a fingertip, wiped clean where the writer had tried to speak. A small wooden doll rested in the corner, arms folded behind her back. Her eyes were painted wide, mouth a soft, uneasy smile. Clara picked it up, and something cold ran across her fingertips. She turned it over. The doll's back had been hollowed out, and inside, wrapped in tissue-thin parchment, was a photograph. A girl in front of the house, familiar blue dress, no face. It had been scraped away until only an oval remained, a white blur where her expression should be. But Clara could see enough of the background to know the swing was there, and the same ivy still curled along the porch railing. The photo was old, but not ancient. It could have been from 10 years ago, or yesterday. She crawled back out. The door closed behind her, all on its own. Not with a slam, but a hush. A tired exhale. She sat cross-legged in the attic, the doll in her lap, the photo resting on the floor. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Never empty. Later, when she lit a fresh candle and returned to her journal, she found something had been written for her. Did you see her? She likes you. That's not always a good thing. The candle guttered low, not from wind, but from breath. Clara turned, heart slow, hands still. No one there, only the mirror, only her own reflection, and just behind it, the shape of a girl looking back. Outside, the wind rose. The branches of the old yew trees tapped the roof like knuckles on a closed coffin. Clara shut the journal. She wrapped the doll in an old scarf and placed it beneath her bed. Then she turned the mirror to face the wall. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. Some things were meant to be seen only once. That night she dreamed of ash-covered rooms and staircases that went nowhere, of swings that moved without wind, and of a girl who stood in a doorway, whispering Clara's name like a memory, trying to be born again. It started with a hum, a low, nearly musical vibration under the floorboards, too soft to be sound, but enough to stir the soles of Clara's feet as she stepped out of bed. The candle on the nightstand hadn't burned down. The flame stood straight and unmoving, as if frozen. The hum pulsed again. Not from the walls, not from the attic, from below. Clara moved slowly, wrapping herself in her old quilt, the one with the faded burgundy stitching. Her footsteps were quiet, not out of fear, but reverence. The hallway was empty. The doors remained closed, each one sealed by time and dust. But at the end of the hall, where the floor dipped slightly, a line of golden light traced the gap between the floorboards, like something was glowing in the crawl space beneath the house. She had never seen it before. In the kitchen, the clock had stopped. It always stopped at 3:17 a.m. It was 3:17 now. The light flickered under the cellar door, just a suggestion of it. Not harsh, not cold. Warm, like firelight through frosted glass. But there was no fire down there. There had never been a fire down there. The key was already in the lock. As if waiting, Clara turned it without thinking. The door opened on a stairwell steeped in silence, the kind of silence that felt chosen, like it had something to protect. The air smelled of rosemary and damp stone. She descended the stairs, slowly, each one moaning beneath her bare feet. At the bottom, the cellar opened like a forgotten chapel, wide, echoing, lined in brick and memory. The light came from the far wall. From beneath it, a crack had formed in the stones, narrow but glowing from within, like the heartbeat of the house had started to shine. Clara knelt. She didn't touch it. She simply watched. And in the glow, a shape began to form. Not in the room, but in her mind. A girl. The girl. Not older. Not younger. just there. Her hair was long and wet, as though she had stepped in from a storm no one else could feel. She didn't speak, but she pointed. Clara turned and saw the corner of the cellar she'd never dared explore. A broken vanity stood there, its mirror cracked like ice in a thaw. Dust clung to its frame, but something had been placed carefully on the tabletop. A child's music box. Silver, dented, familiar. She opened it. The tune was warped, as though the gears remembered what it meant to be played but had forgotten how. Inside was a single slip of paper. The window is not a window. It's an invitation. Clara looked up. The glow behind her flickered, and then dimmed. She turned, and the crack in the wall was gone. The light had gone with it. Back in her bedroom, the candle finally flickered. Once, twice, then returned to its slow dance. The clock still read 3:17, but the hum had stopped. She placed the music box on the floor and let it play once more. Softer now, as though the house itself were humming along. She didn't need to write anything in the journal. The message had already been left. On her window pane, drawn with the moisture of a breath that wasn't hers. Tomorrow, you'll see. And so she waited, wrapped in the hush of a house that whispered more than it spoke. The cellar door creaked shut. But it wasn't the end. It never was. The morning light didn't come. Clara waited for it, but it never arrived. The sky outside was pale, not dark, not bright, like the sun had risen behind a curtain and chosen not to pull it back. The trees stood still, branches frozen mid-sway, their shadows unmoving on the wall. It felt like the house was holding its breath again. Only this time, it wasn't just the house. Something had shifted. The space between moments had grown wider. The air was thicker, and the girl in the window had not appeared. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, the music box resting in her lap. It hadn't played again. Not since last night. Not since the cellar and the message drawn in fog. She traced the metal lid with her fingers. Slow, absent, listening for something that wasn't there. Outside the window, the same scene remained. The iron fence, the empty street, the lamplight that had not gone out. But the window felt different now. Not just glass. A threshold. She stood and moved toward it, her hand hovering near the curtain. Not to open it, just to feel the space between fabric and glass. Then she heard it. A knock. Not on the door. Not on the window. On the walls. Software deliberate, measured. 3 taps, evenly spaced, as if echoing a memory. She turned, heart quiet, breath steady. The knock came again, from a different wall. And again, this time, from beneath her feet. The rhythm wasn't threatening. It was patient. Clara stepped into the hallway. The floor was colder than usual. She wrapped her cardigan tighter and moved toward the study. Everything was untouched. The dust, the scattered notes, the books cracked open to pages she didn't remember reading. The knocking had stopped. But she wasn't alone. She could feel it. Someone, something had entered the house. Not loudly, not violently, just arrived. like a visitor who didn't need to use the door. She passed the staircase and reached the sitting room. The fireplace had been cold for days, but now a single ember glowed at the center of the ashes. No flame, no smoke, just a quiet red pulse. She knelt beside it. Something had been placed on the hearth. A child's ribbon, frayed at one end, folded neatly. She didn't touch it, just studied it as though it were part of a message still forming. The room was silent until she heard it again. Not a knock this time, but a step. Software behind her. Clara turned. No one. But the smell of wet leaves drifted through the air. Familiar, like the woods in October after the rain. The front door was still locked, the windows still sealed. She was still alone, and yet she wasn't. Later in the kitchen, Clara found something else. A trail of damp footprints, small, bare, like those of a child, starting at the back door and ending at the rug. They didn't match hers. They weren't fresh either. They were faint, like echoes. She stepped around them carefully, then paused. The footprints didn't begin at the door. They began inward, leading toward the window, and stopped at the sill. She wrote in her journal, slowly, she's not at the window now, but she's here. Then beneath that, with trembling fingers, she didn't come to look in. She came to look out. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat with the music box in her lap, listening for the knock that didn't return. The ember had gone cold again. But something unseen had been left in its place, a folded piece of paper under her pillow. She opened it carefully. One sentence in the same careful handwriting as before. "You're almost there." The mirror in the hallway had never bothered her before. It was just there. Tall, narrow, silver-framed. One of those things a house keeps, even if no one uses it. Clara passed it a dozen times a day, sometimes without looking, sometimes glancing, catching the blur of her own motion as she moved from room to room. But this morning, it stopped her. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. There was no reflection, not of her, not of the hallway, just a soft, pulsing blur, like fog trapped behind glass. She tilted her head. So did the mist, but not quite in sync. A moment too slow, or too fast, a flicker off rhythm. She blinked. The image didn't. She whispered into the quiet hallway just barely. "Hello?" The blur held, and then it moved. Not like a figure, not like a ghost, like a place shifting, as though the glass had grown deep, not transparent, but dimensional. A window, not a mirror, and inside it, something flickered. A candle, in a room Clara didn't know. She reached toward it. Fingers paused just an inch from the glass, not out of fear, but reverence. The air was cold, then behind her. The hallway light blinked once, then again, and stayed off. Clara turned. Darkness met her. Soft, thick, not hostile. Just complete. When she looked back at the mirror, The mist was gone, and in its place, a reflection. Her face, but not her expression. Her mouth was still, calm, but the mouth in the glass was whispering. She took a step back, then another. The lights returned. The mirror stilled, and the whispering stopped. In the sitting room, she lit a candle from the drawer. The match hissed like a breath held too long. She let the flame settle, watching the walls dance gently with shadow. The air had that quiet weight again, like someone had just left or just arrived. She checked the window. No girl, but something was different. A note had been slipped between the glass and the frame, not taped, not pinned, just gently folded and placed there, as if it had been waiting. She unfolded it. The handwriting was still the same, but this time only 2 words. She remembers. The hallway mirror waited. Clara passed it slowly, carrying the candle like a guide through fog. She didn't look into the glass. Not this time. But just before she turned the corner, she heard it again. A breath. Inside the mirror. Later, when the house had gone still again, Clara sat in her room with the candle burning low. She took the music box from the dresser and opened it. Slowly, gently. This time, it played. The melody was the same, but softer, as though it had learned how to whisper. On her bedside table, she placed the ribbon, the note, and the photograph of the girl in the window. She didn't know what any of it meant. Not fully. But she knew this. The girl wasn't watching anymore. She was remembering, and the house was listening. There was one door Clara hadn't tried. Not locked, not hidden, just avoided. It was on the 3rd floor at the end of the hall, past the linen cupboard, past the creaky floorboard she'd memorized. It had always been there. She just never had reason to open it. Until tonight. The air on the stairs felt colder than before. Not frightening, just aware, as if the house had turned its head slightly to watch her climb. She held the candle close, protecting its flickering light from the soft draft. The flame bent sideways with each step, bowing toward the 3rd floor. The hallway met her like a hush. No sound, no movement, just the door. White paint, brass knob, a small old keyhole, and a faint warmth, not from behind it, but beneath it, a soft amber glow, as if a fire had been lit on the other side. But she hadn't touched this room, not once. Clara turned the knob. It opened without resistance. The room inside was small, almost square, dusty but not forgotten. Curtains hung heavy over the windows, letting in only slivers of moonlight. There was no furniture except a single armchair in the far corner, facing the wall, and on the wall, painted letters, barely visible under peeling wallpaper, faded by time, but still there. Clara stepped closer. She brushed the wall with her fingertips, letting the dust fall gently. 4 words. I never left her. She turned to the chair. The cushion was worn, its fabric stretched and sagging, like someone had sat there often, and recently. She reached out, touched the back of it. Warm, not just from the house, but from presence. There was no one there, not visibly, but something remained. Something quiet, watching without malice. She sat down, and for a moment, it felt right, as if she'd returned to a story she'd forgotten she was part of. Across from her, on the wall, a framed mirror, not like the one downstairs. This one was small, oval, antique, and inside it, the reflection of the room, but not of her, only the chair, empty, even as she sat in it. Clara stood. The reflection stood with her this time, and then, slowly, the chair behind her creaked. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She simply whispered, "I know." She walked back toward the door, but something on the floor caught her eye, just under the radiator. A small, folded envelope, yellowed with age. She picked it up. No name, just a faint wax seal on the flap, the shape of a window. Inside, a page torn from a journal. It read, "I see her clearer now, not just in the glass, but in myself. She was never haunting me. I was remembering her." Clara folded the paper gently, cradling it in her hand. Then, candle in one palm, letter in the other, she closed the door behind her, and the hallway exhaled, like a story nearing its last line. The morning came gently. No bird song, no sudden brightness, just a dim pearled light through the curtains, the kind that feels like a hush rather than a beginning. Clara woke slowly, not startled, not anxious, just present. Her candle had burned out hours ago. The last of its wax curled in a little puddle on the bedside dish. She didn't remember falling asleep, only listening, not to sounds in the house, but to something quieter, like breath, like memory. Downstairs, the house waited. The hallways felt softer somehow, as if the air had folded itself around her gently, no longer holding its breath. No more flickers in the mirror. No more waiting figures beyond the glass. Only Clara, and the warmth in her chest that hadn't been there before. She walked to the window, the one she had once feared. She drew back the curtain, and there, on the sill, tucked beneath a smooth stone, was the journal page she thought she had lost. The one from the attic. The one she'd sworn had vanished. But now, it was here. Returned. Like something had finished its journey. She picked it up. The writing was unchanged, but beneath the original words, something had been added in the same delicate ink. A single line. "Thank you for seeing me." Clara smiled. It was small, tired, and real. She folded the paper again, not to hide it, but to keep it. She didn't need to understand everything. Some stories aren't puzzles, they're echoes. And this one had found its last note. She turned once more to the mirror by the stairs. No shadows, no shifts, just herself. No longer a girl searching, but someone who had heard. She nodded to her reflection, and the house nodded back. She stepped outside, The mist was fading. The trees stood still. The town, that strange, quiet town, had softened too. No whispers behind windows, no flickers, no lingering eyes, just air and silence and peace. If you're still with me, tell me in the comments, what stayed with you the most tonight? Was it the girl behind the glass? The letters? The way the house listened? Or something else entirely? Something only you felt? I'd love to know. And now, you're safe. The story is done. There's nothing left behind it. Only dreams now. Sleep well. I'll see you next time.